Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry.
Jak miło widzieć pana, panie Jakubie.
I wzajemnie, panie Stefanie.
Hello, happy to see
To wszystkim nam jest miło widzieć się.
Ale my to...
we are also pleased to see each other, and we haven't seen each other for quite some time. And as they say, it's very nice to see you, all of you.
Знову всіх вітаю. Дякую, що ви доєдналися
So,
до нашого
dear
заходу.
speakers, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our event. I want to remind you that we have a few languages today, so please change the language channel to the one that is more comfortable to you.
In Zoom, so that you will hear everything and understand everything. Okay, so today we'll... Я перепрошую.
Sorry.
Сьогодні ми будемо
Сьогодні.
говорити
Today we're going to be
про сферу.
talking about construction and our project that is called Path of Ukraine to European Union and the experience of Poland. We're talking about Polish experience, their business in their markets and our efforts towards the integration. We had a few other discussions before. Before we talked about agricultural markets, about transport, about pharmaceuticals, and all of these discussions you can find on our website, also on YouTube, and these results we also use in order to write analytic papers, and everything that we're going to be producing today is going to be used. And I'm very happy to see everyone, and I hope that our discussion today is going to be fruitful. And I want to give the floor to our moderator, Lukasz Voydyga, that is representing our partner, the Foundation of Warsaw Institute of Entrepreneurship. Please, Lukasz. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ms. Irina, for introducing me within the framework of this meeting. My name is Lukasz Voydyga, and I represent the Center of Strategic Research, and I'm very pleased that I can be moderating this meeting today. I'm also very pleased to see that many participants, and it's very pleasing that this topic is really so high profile and everyone is so interested in this on both sides. And I want to welcome all the participants of our today's meeting and speakers. Hello also to Stefan Assanowicz, who is the Vice President of Poland Commercial Chamber, and also Mr. Konrad Wyrwas. He is the Director of Development Strategy at the Polish Employers Association of Construction. Also Jakub Troszyński, who is an expert in construction investment, legal advisor at ODJT law firms. And this was Polish side. I also want to welcome Ukrainian representatives, and this is Hennady Faranyuk. He is the Director of the Research Institute of Building Structures, and also Oleksandr Melnychenko, who is Acting Executive Director of UkraineInvest, and Mr. Rostislav Korobka, who is the Vice President of the Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Volodymyr Vysyuk, who is the Director of Ukrprom Expertise. It's a long name, but I think that this institution is known to everyone. Once again, thank you very much to our experts that you agreed to be part of our today's meeting. And I would like to start from the question to Mr. Director Wyrwas, and precisely what is, as they say, what does the construction industry look like in Poland right now? from the point of view of fast development, and there are a lot of challenges. There is a labor shortage and new technology, innovative products, and also environmental requirements are growing that EU is setting. We remember that we're talking about this old these buildings that are going to be built, they need to have zero emissions. So what is the key challenges that Polish construction sector faces? So dear ladies and gentlemen, about how it is right now in Poland, I can say that it's quite good, even now in public space. There are some voices about certain slowing down the process, but I must say that this is a transition process, and this is a powerful market that is quite strong already. But we must say that also along with that, there are other markets that are growing. It's transport market and other markets, and this is the time to grow. And in the context of this, I believe that there's a development that's happening. In broader sense, this is the market that is functioning very good. It has almost 300 billion zlotych of annual revenue, and there is full agreement on the analytics that this is the market that is going to be growing, continue growing. So approximately 5-6 years, 500,000 of zloty, it's gonna be the revenue. So it's approximately, it's gonna grow to 500 billion. This is first information, and another one that at this point in Poland, and I'm saying it with all responsibility, we have one of the best construction firms in Europe. Maybe it's not the biggest, but those are the ones that are using the newest standards, the newest technologies in its work, and including all the requirements that are being set by different institutions, organizations, the decisions and directives of European Union or other organizations and regulations, and all the construction regulations and the rules. And all that is included and considered when it gets to construction in Poland. But for it not to look so good, as they say, you know, there is always something, there's always a fly in the ointment. There are some problems, of course, and we must say that certain requirements of the EU that we see on the horizon and that we in Poland, or in particular construction companies, that we need to consider. In particular, we're talking about a very dangerous thing that is coming closer. This is the problems on labor market and the existing amount of a labor force, people that want to work in construction. And here, unfortunately, there are a few factors or certain things that can impact this, or they do impact this. Unfortunately, this is a process, an irreversible process, and we need to use automatization of the processes and modern technology to help ourselves with the labor shortage. We also need to take on some model if we talk about migration, because quite honestly, despite of how saturated the labor market for construction is going to be in any way, it requires certain policy, some migration policy, and this is something that the government is engaged in, where they would include the needs of the labor market, because we see that now there are certain geographical changes that are happening, and now less people are coming to from Ukraine and Belarus due to certain reasons, and our market is reaching out to seek the workers from other countries, Eastern countries, for example, China and other countries. And if we use proper migration policy, I think we can overcome this problem, and I think we can cover the labor shortage, but also demographic problem overlaps with this, because now we have one of the lowest indicators. It's approximately the birth rate 1.3, and it has to be at least 2.1 to keep it efficient. And our partners are in an even tougher situation that is caused mostly by the war, because it's 0.8, for example, and it is quite a serious problem. So the demography, this is a problem, and it is quite frankly impacting the situation. Even if we decide or we somehow improve the demographic situation, but I think the result of such improvements will be seen within the coming decades or a few decades. I think we will be seeing this problem. And I think 20, 30 years, this is still something to be seen. And we will have to use certain other solutions. As I mentioned, it would be automation of certain processes on the construction sites. It could be some other processes in other areas of construction. And this is something that has to be taken into consideration and highlighted by the partners from Ukraine, because if you don't feel it now, I think that very soon this problem is going to become one of the most relevant. So just to summarize my little speeches for the labor market, we must say that the situation from this point of view is not the worst. And the companies, they have certain resources that are enough to export Polish construction services. And Ukraine, maybe at this point, is not using that too much due to certain reasons and military reasons. But it can also go through Polish companies to other markets, Scandinavian markets, Romania, Czech Republic, Romania, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and so on. So this ability to cover its own market and also help working on neighbor markets, I think it's going to be working like this, and we're proposing our help for those who want to reach out to those markets. So to summarize, everything is good. The situation is not bad. As of now, there are no particular reasons that are showing that somewhere a disaster should happen. Mr. Konrad, can you comment on the structure on property? We have a few construction conglomerations, but we know that there are a lot of SMEs in this also. 500,000 companies, if we count it down, that the ones that work on Polish market, it's 1,300,000 workers in construction. It's mostly small, medium companies, and it's most often the ones where the owners it's where that are run by self-proprietors, and
Natomiast z drugiej strony mamy firmy
This
średnie,
also
firmy
sets the
małe.
diversity of this market, but on the other side, we have medium-sized enterprises and also some quite powerful companies. We had a period in our activity in this area, this industry. And I think that maybe next speakers, they will cover this a little bit better. But we had this period when we were seeing the decrease of the amount of construction companies, where at some point the Western construction companies were entering the picture. But at this point, we already found our way around this situation, and the Polish companies in this industry, they're growing quite good. They're using the capital, and probably the first few years it was combined companies combined with Western capital. Most of the companies would work like that. But at this point, we have companies, according to the statistics, we have companies,
To w pierwszej dziesiątce mamy w tej chwili 5 firm stricte
five companies that are solely using Polish capital. And out of those five, we have companies that, there are also companies that have this combined capital, for example, Budimex, because, for example, Budimex has 60% of the state capital and also private equity. But as we see, this graduate process of coming back to Polish capital is happening. If we talk about the equity in those companies, and it's those some companies where there's 100% Western capital. They're working solely with Polish legislation, and they have a few thousands of people that work there, Polish people, according to the regulations and Polish legislation. And also they are having contracts with subcontractors, and they employ a few thousands of Polish employees. Also, they ensure some other sectors with work. And it could be some related areas when it gets to territory, equipment, and so on. And those are the companies that pay taxes, specifically in Poland. So somehow this market already found its place. It has gotten its structure and looks quite good now if we're talking about the structure. But we must say that this 300 million zloty that I mentioned, this is the work of construction companies that are working with construction, residential construction. And if we talk about other projects, when they build energy lines and railroads and so on, here it's going to be about those powerful companies, powerful entities that we probably can say that without those smaller companies, they wouldn't be able to implement bigger projects. And we can see the cooperation between segments, and there's no, so to say, big competition. We don't see any negative processes. So little by little, this market is moving forward. Of course, there are certain ups and downs, but anyway, the process of growing is happening. Thank you very much, Mr. Konrad, for this detailed review of our construction sector. I would like to ask Mr. Volodymyr to also provide a similar assessment of the situation in the construction market in Ukraine, a country that is being in a very hard situation where the war is taking its place, the infrastructure is damaged. And we know that in the first years of war, it was 100 billion in losses. And we know that a lot of residential houses were destroyed and energy infrastructure, $1 billion. That's what the experts say when it gets to assessment, to evaluation, the damages of Ukraine. But on the other side, when you get in the country, you see that the renovation is happening and the roads and the bridges. So what's the situation right now?
So as I have understand, that's my word now, yes? If I'm correct. Okay, okay. Can I share the screen, please, in order to present you some slides?
But please speak in Ukrainian because we have a translation.
You do have translation in Ukrainian?
Yes.
Okay, my presentation is in English, so I can on the both languages, or Ukrainian or English, as you.
It's in Ukrainian because of
Ukraine.
translation.
Okay, okay, thanks. Я зараз відкрию презентацію.
Now I will open the presentation.
Ага, окей. Зараз видно на екрані, так?
Do you see my presentation now?
Нормально, добре.
Już widzimy, tak.
Отже, я керую компанією, яка
Yes.
Володимир,
Okay, so
перепрошую,
I-
на українському каналі чуємо польський переклад.
Excuse me, Mr. Volodymyr, we hear Polish translation on the Ukrainian channel. Yes, all good. Thank you for
Дякую. Продовжуйте, будь ласка.
mentioning. Yes, please carry on. Yes, thank you. So I'm managing the company that works in research and consulting, and we also take part in the activity of developing economic policy. And just recently we had two researches, first in 2023 and second time was this year. And this research is dedicated to identifying how much of that building material we actually need in order to reconstruct those demolished sites or objects of social infrastructure, residential locations, also infrastructure overall. And the first goal was to identify the scope that is needed, the scope of the building materials, and also assess the readiness of our companies to produce that amount of materials that we are going to identify, and also provide the recommendations of economic policy for what? To engage Ukrainian producers in this process as much as possible, because we are also looking at this as an important part of renovation, the integration as much as possible of Ukrainian manufacturers in the process of manufacturing this amount of product. Because if we talk about the reconstruction, and if it's going to be a lot of imported products, when Ukrainian business can also make it themselves, it's going to also have impact on the economy. And in order to make us more independent from the budget, donor help that we of course need and we're already using, we thought about this way. So we tried to assess all the damages that we have in Ukraine. You have the map of Ukraine. This is the map of World Bank, where you can see the territories with big damages, and the darker the color is, the worse it is. And you can see it's in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kharkiv region, and also there are some spots of destruction in Kyiv region. And this map is dynamic. It's constantly changing. And this is the project that Kyiv School of Economy is leading. Do you hear me? Okay, all good? So the project that is led by Kyiv School of Economy, this is something we were using for our calculation. I'm not going to stop here too long on the methodology because we don't have that much time, but I'm going to present the results. So according to our calculation, the scope in money of all the material that is needed for the reconstruction, it's more than $62 billion. So this is a lot of money, including the Ukrainian GDP, $180 billion last year, $62 billion. This is a lot of money for Ukraine. And we also were counting everything on separate type of product. So we took 31 namings here, the key ones that are approximately 80% of the overall costs that are needed. And on each of them, we identified how much we needed in physical meaning of it and how much in money equivalent. And that's what we can be orienting on when it gets to reconstruction. So once again, more than $62 billion. And this number, of course, requires certain correction. We had a new research. I cannot talk about the results yet because we have an agreement with our American clients about that, but it's a little bit lower, but it's still very big, this figure. And if we do this production in Ukraine, the impact on our economy is going to be colossal. We also calculated it's going to be more than 90,000 working spots that is going to be preserved, and also $3.5 billion of taxes is going to be added to the budget, and also the GDP can be up to $9 billion, and it's very important for reconstruction. And I'm going to show you what it's going to look like, the need and the use of this construction material in Ukraine. We took in 5 years here. There are some discussions. The World Bank says that it has to be 8 years or 10 years. And our people say that it has to be very fast, 3 years. So we decided to stop in the middle. Why? Because 10 years to wait until they have their house for people, it's very long. We believe that the task will be to do it within 5 years or even less, so the speed should be quite big. And because just imagine, people are waiting for their housing, and we are interested to make more Ukrainians come back home. So if we do it within 5 years, this is the picture approximately for usage of this construction materials in millions of dollars for each year. In 2021, it was a good year for construction. We used $13, $10 billion here, and we see the period of reconstruction. We expect that at first it's going to be lower, then it's going to be bigger, but the dynamics is approximately like this: 15, 17, 24 billion dollars, and approximately like this. This is the growth of this scope of construction material. And we also answered the question whether Ukrainian business can actually do that, can produce that much material. Yes, if we step aside and we assume that it's going to be meeting all the standards that is going to be set, subject to using also the financial support from donors, and they can do up to 90% of this product. Of course, it's going to be import of certain things and it's going to be competition, but this is going to be good for the regional economy. There's another important thing, maybe you're going to be interested. We also looked into what's going to be with the capacity of the construction, because before I was talking about the materials and now we're talking about construction itself. So on this graph, we see the expectations of the scope of construction works that have to be carried out in Ukraine if we have the reconstruction of what has been ruined by the war. And those pillars here, they show in square meters how much property should be built. For example, in 2018, 2021, it was in average 13.7 million square meters. That's something that was built yearly. In 2023, 2022, it was a significant drop because of the war. Then in 2027, it's going to be approximately in 2023, it was 9.7, sorry. And here we can see how it's going to grow for the period of reconstruction. And this is starting from 16.5, and it's going to gradually grow to 24 million square meters. And this line is showing the capacity of our construction companies. They were quite powerful before the war, but now it's significantly less due to a list of reasons. First is the workforce conscription, the need to defend their country, and this brings the shortage of labor. And the first limiting factor. There's another limiting factors. So that's why we expect a big deficit in capacity in construction in Ukraine. How it's going to be handled, we need to think about that and take certain decisions. But we have this line between the needs in building capacity and construction capacity and the capacity itself. But I just want to say that maybe we need to add some capacities from the outside as well. But the deficit, you can see it's 1/3. And I'm almost done. As for the policy, we need first of all to support our enterprises within these conditions. They have three big problems when it comes to construction materials. First is specialists. Ukraine has to find balance between Ukrainians warriors and Ukrainians workers. And here it's going to be efficient if there's going to be economic exemption or booking from the military service. And also another thing is internal market on construction materials that is quite weak. There are a lot of things that Ukraine doesn't make. For example, Ukraine doesn't make the glass for construction, and all of those initiatives, they have to be supported. And the third block is cooperation with partners. This is a very important key block. And here, let's say, we need to stick and to adapt this approach that in order to support the economy, we need to use really Ukrainian capacity. And for that, we need to have different forms of cooperation. One of them is, for example, the things we discuss is the preparedness of the sector to meet the standards of European Union. I will be frank, we don't know what exactly that's going to look like and what are the requirements. We know that there's 301 regulation that is very important, that is comparing the Ukrainian and European standards, but that's where Polish experience and experience of our colleagues is very valuable, and the green approach, and we can talk about green steel, green concrete, and so on. But this is not very clear regulation to us. As far as we understand, the European Union doesn't really see the full picture yet themselves as well. But we need to have the clarity if our donors, our partners are going to be helping us within this process. We need to understand how it's going to be connected to the requirements of the quality of the product and what are those. I'm done. This is the cooperation with donors and partners, more detailed, and I just want to say the different forms of cooperation are very important. They have to be worked on right now. This is joint enterprises, consortiums, and different sort of contracts and different forms that would ensure the cooperation of technology and reasonable competition on Ukrainian market. That's it from me. Thank you. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive presentation and for presenting the information about the relevant information on construction market in Ukraine. We are very pleased that you mentioned about European regulations and all the rules in this area. I would like to invite our colleague Jakub Troszyński, who could speak about how those provisions from EU is impacting Poland, because when Poland entered EU, it was 20 years ago, and those regulations, they were quite limited. And as of now, we know that a lot of changes have taken place in technology and requirements as for the energetic transition that is connected to so-called Green Deal, and as what else except for the environmental
Dziękuję bardzo, panie prezesie.
requirements
Słuchajcie,
are
trzeba zacząć
part
od
of
tego,
those
że
requirements that
bardzo
EU
dużo
sets? Thank you for the question, but I think
tego,
first
co
we need to
jest,
start with this,
jest
that
współfinansowana
quite a
ze
big
środków
part of
w taki sposób, jaką
structure that is
środków
happening in Poland right now, they are financed or co-financed also by the money from EU. It's the Unity Foundation and other money of the EU, and all of this is used while implementing investment projects, and all is interconnected. If we look at this from this, bird view, so to say, a bigger picture, we must say that the usage of this money is happening with the implementation of the requirements as for how the market should function. And Mr. Volodymyr, one of the slides, he mentioned about the opportunities for cooperation and creating joint enterprises and using all possible forms of cooperation and Ukrainian companies with external companies. And if we talk about Poland, we, as for the requirements, those requirements, they were not particularly just put out. There was a principle that was adopted that you cannot limit those requirements during tenders just by Polish companies. And this type of limitation or some preferences and benefits, they would mean certain correctives as for financing or certain problems when it gets to getting money from EU. And these elements, they were seen as not acceptable. And this led to the point that there was certain dogma taken in that we work on joint market on of EU, and taking into consideration that this market is joint, despite of the fact whether this market is joint or no, we have to take it equally, and we have to treat them equally, just as Mr. Wyrwas was saying in their speech. It doesn't change the fact that 20 years of being in EU, Polish capital, every time they take for stronger positions, stronger and stronger in construction sector, but this trend was looking differently before. Western companies were mostly mastering the Polish market, and they were at least general subcontractors when it was about implementing certain investment contracts on the territory of Poland the first years of being part of EU. If we talk about legal aspects and EU foundations, then the right of state orders when we talk about the directives of EU about how tenders must look like. Those were all directives from 91, 92, but the expanding of EU in 2004, there were another two directives that also became that came into force, and it was about the state orders, and they were built in a way so they can popularize as much as possible the equality of all the partners that take part in tenders, and there was no specific no specific um, maybe levitating towards Western partners or Polish partners, but we also talk about technological leverage, for example, adaptation to technological requirements. And here I'm talking about also Polish market, not only about state orders and the procedure on how this is happening, but also including all this. Poland had to adapt the rules and the regulation to those requirements. Hence, all the legislation was put into compliance with the rules of EU. We also mentioned, someone mentioned about what else happened, what other changes happened except for environmental requirements. I'm not going to say what's going to be. Mr. Volodymyr, he mentioned very precisely that we don't know what other changes can happen, but those that have already happened, this is a directive on the environmental impact assessment. And also, I think there are two key directives as 85 from 1985 as for the impact of the consequences that are caused by the impact on the environment, and also another one is so first there are some regulations, normative legal acts on the strategic level that they take in, and then the assessment of its impact on environment. Hence, first, the overall impact is being assessed, and then specific solutions that are going to be used in this or that investment project. And on that, on top, a whole system of requirements is being put on when it gets to environmental requirements. This is something that is called Natura 2000. And here we talk about that the whole territory of the country, there's a whole list of areas for example, animal settlements and or plants that are under protection, or system of national parks, for example. This is additional network, Natura 2000. It has also been taken into consideration when it gets to investment project. All of those elements, they play key roles when it gets to the term of implementation, the length of the project, because it has a lot of impact. It really stretches out the process of assessment of an investment project. And when it gets to Polish innovative projects, standard projects, for example, or those, for example, a road building project, it's 7-8 years within this idea before the investment realization. So the first years is the construction, but before it's a few years for construction, a few years for preparation. But we see that the assessment of the environmental impact is also a big thing here. But when we see that the implementation project is even bigger, then that term can be even longer. It can be even not, finishing itself, and the investment project will just be put on hold and not going to be implemented. Hence, but we must say that the institutions of EU, they have a very clear position, and from how all of those requirements will be met, all of those environmental requirements, this is something to impact whether the financing from EU funds will be happening or not happening. And I also wanted to add one more thing that is connected to the materials. So there's a European emission system, and this is very important when it gets to, for example, cement production or any high emission production of steel, any company, any activity that can cause a big amount of emissions. And of course, the production of these materials is very hard. But from this point of view, another question is going to be very important, whether the financial institutions, if they're interested in this enterprise, then a big role will go towards this aspect to make sure that those companies, they comply with all the regulations when it gets to CO2 emissions. But that would mean that Ukrainian companies, they will have to comply with European regulations. Of course, there possibly could be some transition period, but we need to really take into consideration those rules that are used on such enterprises, or Ukraine will have to resort to import. This is the key things. Thank you very much, Mr. Jakub. The whole time we're talking about reconstruction issues, which is quite natural, but taking this into consideration, I would like to also talk to Mr. Stefan Assanowicz. So what should be the role of Polish construction companies when we talk about the process of reconstruction of Ukraine? Are we expecting to be in a role of subcontractors, or do you think that Polish companies can play their own autonomous role? We know that Polish companies already, as they say, they have already entered this process or just waiting for the beginning of this massive reconstruction.
Bardzo dziękuję. Dzień dobry Państwu.
Thank you very much. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is quite a broad question when it gets to reconstruction, and I'm going to answer this in two phases, two stages, so to say. First of all, when it gets to the size of our construction market, this information is very positive. The first 15 companies on the market, according to the international report for 2022, because this report is done with 10-month delay. It's always December last year. So the next report for 2023-2025, and among those 15 biggest companies on the world market, 6 out of them are Polish companies with 100% Polish equity, and this the price, the value is 16 billion zlotys, and hence when we joined EU, such powerful Polish companies, there were not a lot of them, but then years after, part of these companies, they were on the stage of initial recapitalization, and this is a very positive thing. And also something that Jakub Troszyński mentioned, when it gets to this period of 90s, 2000s, we were using the fund of European Bank on Reconstruction, World Bank. We also were using other financial opportunities that were provided by the EU, and we were also complying with the rules of taking parts in tenders. We were using world experience as well. This was a transition period for us, but I think we successfully have overcome it. But in order to have successful reconstruction, despite of who's going to take part in this, we need to clearly set the market, and localization of investment must take part. And the second condition is, first of all, finances, the funds, the guaranteed budgets for implementation of different projects. And this is the basic questions that are going to set the market. They're going to set the value in time. And the prognoses that were presented by previous speakers, they show that 6 million square meters of residential buildings, they have to be built within few years, first few years. And 80,000 houses. Of course, this investment can be implemented, but we need to see in what areas and under what conditions the reconstruction will be taking place. How real is that place? Where do I see the role of Polish enterprises? Polish enterprises, they don't have an opportunity to credit for construction works on the territory of Ukraine. And if we talk about, so if we say that for separate projects, for example, 10 kilometers of highway is 300 million zlotys. And let's say that Polish companies, they would have to guarantee the funding of this amount. But these companies, they don't have this opportunity. It has to be some governmental, system. And I think the first things when it gets to reconstruction in Ukraine, I think the leading role will be held by governments and financial institutions as the European Bank of Reconstruction, also World Bank, and to those that have already shown their readiness to take part in reconstruction process in Ukraine. And it's about the conditions under which this can be happening. I myself look very positively on this market, on Ukrainian market. Our joint dream is in this war being ended, and it ends as soon as possible, and it ends in a fair way to Ukraine. And the second thing is the organizing the process of reconstruction. We see that in Ukraine there are a lot of damages in the eastern part of Ukraine. The western part is not that much damaged, but still there are damages also on that part of the country. And in all this, Polish companies, I think, should be divided in two types: the ones that have Polish capital, and the ones that have Western capital. And because, for example, Polish capitals with Spanish capital, there are Polish companies because they realize the investment in Poland, and those companies, they pay taxes in Poland. But quite often those companies, they are also owned by international consortiums, and part of their plans is also reconstruction of Ukraine. And those consortiums, they can also have negotiation as for crediting for part of construction works. And another good thing would be if our government could identify and allocate certain money for reconstruction of Ukraine, and they can be allocated to certain companies as well. I'm not going to talk about financing more and about the opportunities of crediting for reconstruction, because the situation has changed a little bit now, and we should speak on behalf of that. But I must say that there's a huge market that is being created, and the government and the state members of EU, they have a lot of opportunities to implement different projects. They have to create these rules through this conjuncture of and the as for the materials and the basic questions, the scope of the market, the volume of the market, the guarantees from the budget, and the second element that I see here: Polish companies and Polish government, they have to be interested in popularizing Polish companies on Ukrainian market, and also we have to be taking part in the process of financing this participation. If this is not happening, then I think, for example, it's going to be German government, French government for sure will be financing the processes of reconstruction. And of course, it's going to be German companies and French companies that are going to be supported by their governments or their countries. And we must say that this is quite a complicated market if we talk about using European funds and holding up to the standard. And on this market, we need to also stick to the regulations when it gets to financing. And we also need to stick to standards that are acting in European Union. And the third thing, we need to have a catalog of typical requirements of European Union, in particular implementation of the contracts when it gets on the base of, as they call it, FIDIC, FIDIC, and also this is going to be a certain base. But the systems of
to one są do tego przygotowane. Firmy polskie do tego też są
uh,
przygotowane. Natomiast administracja ukraińska musi być
that
przygotowana
that
do
require that are required by the country,
Moje pojęcie od rynku odbudowy
and
jako praktyka inżyniera
Ukrainian government, they also need to prepare themselves how to use those standards. They need to be ready
z
to
długiego stażu pracy
implement them.
w budownictwie.
And
Po prostu trzeba też
I
myśleć,
have a
w
lot
jaki
of
sposób
experience
możemy
in
przyspieszać rozbudowę. No
construction,
bo
and I must say that we
to
need
jest
to
kwestia
think about how we
chwili.
can
No i dlatego
accelerate the
tutaj
process
potrzebna
of
jest standaryzacja,
reconstruction, because
unifikacja
we
i
know that the need is
harmonizacja.
already there today.
No,
But
nie ma
we need
innego
to
wyjścia,
have
no nie
this
ma pola do
standardization,
popisu dla wspaniałych
unification, and
budowień
normalization of the
architektonicznych.
process.
Muszą
There's
być
no other
zrobione
way
funkcjonalne,
except
ładne,
for
proste w konstrukcji,
the
szybkie w
description of
konstrukcji.
beautiful architectural
Jeżeli chodzi
buildings.
o
They also
firmy
have to
szybowe,
be
jeżeli
functional,
chodzi o
fast in
systemy
building,
infrastruktury,
especially if we're
unifikację
talking about
przestrojową
construction
standardów
and
podwozów,
residential construction. If we
powiedzmy
talk
przepisów
about infrastructure, it has to
wbawienie się w
be
jakieś projekty, że
unified,
tak powiem, artystyczne, tylko
and
czyste, proste, techniczne
these
czytanie, konstrukcje
they
prefabrykowane.
have to be clean,
Ja tak to
simple,
widzę.
technical, and
Oczywiście
fast when it
musimy
gets
zdać
to
sobie sprawę z tego,
implementation.
w
At
jaki
least
przód
that's the way I
postępujemy.
see it. So we have to be
Bez wspomnianego
conscious
rynku
about
budownictwa
what we have,
w Polsce, o którym moi
what
poprzednicy mówili,
we
no myśmy
possess right
zatrudniali
now,
w
or
ostatnim okresie przed
what
wojną
are
na rynku
the
polskim 450 tysięcy pracowników
capacities we have right now.
Ukrainy, z Białorusi, z
Because
czego
before the
450
war, we had
pracowników z Ukrainy,
450,000 of
a
worker in
150
construction from
tysięcy
Ukraine, from
Białorusinów.
Belarus,
Dzisiaj
and
to zdoskonalało.
150,000 were
Rzeczywiście
from
dzisiaj
Belarus, and almost
widzę rąk dziura.
300,000 from Ukraine. Today, it's much lower, this
To jest
number.
kwestia
And
rozwiązania
we are
tego
also lacking the hands.
w krótkoterminowym okresie, dlatego że bez tego nasz rynek, czy to eksportu, czy to
And this problem has to
budownictwa
be
wewnętrznego,
handled as
no,
soon
jest
as
bardzo
possible.
ograniczony. Jeśli chodzi o rynek ukraiński, polskie firmy na pewno powinny kooperować z
And
firmami
if we talk
ukraińskimi
about Ukrainian market,
więc te firmy również
then
powinny
Polish
być
companies, they probably have to
współpracownikami
cooperate with
polskiej firmy
Ukrainian
albo w
companies.
postaci konsorcjów, albo w postaci podwykonawstwa.
And
Natomiast mówię, ja z tej
maybe
strony
some
rynku lokalizacji, budżetów i
consortium
sposobu
has to be
organizacji
created
przetargu
or
po
be a
przeciwnej stronie będą
subcontractor. So
kontrakty z łącznie.
identifying the financial
Nie wolno nas
opportunities,
oszukiwać.
identifying
Tylko
the
będą przetargi
conditions
otwarte. No,
of
wystarczy mówić
running
głośno,
tenders
rozstrzygujmy
and
to
so on.
nieśmiecie
This
ciężko
is
i
probably
inaczej
going to
niż
be
rynek wygląda.
open tenders. So we have
Jeśli
to know
chodzi
for
o
sure when,
standaryzację, jeśli
how, and
chodzi
what does the market look like.
o
When we talk about
to ona jest możliwa
standardization,
wszędzie. Jeśli chodzi o
then it is possible everywhere.
inne odbudowy. Natomiast
And
oczywiście
if we talk about
musimy to
this
podzielić też, no
fast
bo ucierpiały też zakłady
reconstruction,
przemysłowe,
then
ucierpiały
we
też
probably have
poza
to
infrastrukturą oczywiście
break it down, because there were
branż
some
budowniczych,
industrial enterprises
mieszkaniowych.
that were
No i to
ruined, or
jeśli zakres
infrastructural
zadania
objects, or
przeglądu
a
grup budowlanych
lot
jest
of
bardzo skomplikowane.
residential
Ich
houses,
zdolności
and all of
eksportowe
this
na
has to be broken
rynek
down
ukraiński.
and assessed. As
Natomiast
for the
bardzo
export
dużym problemem dla
capacity,
wszystkich
for the Ukrainian market and the capacity of Ukrainian companies. And I think a big problem for everyone, in particular Polish companies and Western companies, would be the details. When it gets to Polish companies and their capacity to take part in reconstruction, it has to be clear, set very clearly, as for our participation, the criteria from both sides, from both governments, Ukrainian and Polish, and also the preliminary financing, crediting, hence everything that is happening is we know that Ukraine puts a lot of effort and they're fighting for the country and they're now concentrating on this. But if we talk about the future, we also need to help Ukraine, support it, and maybe use all possible forms of, in particular, funding. But I think the decision as for that has to be taken by European institutions. I now would like to also address to Mr. Rostislav with the following question. What are the actions that were measurements has the Ukrainian government take on in order to provide some, to incentivize Polish companies? And here we're talking about certain benefits, about tender process, and to create this friend, um friendly atmosphere when it gets to implementation of such projects in Ukraine, because we remember that the participation of Polish companies in Ukraine was not necessarily always positive. For example, when we talk about building the border project in Shehyni, for example, what do you think? How do you assess it, and what has the Ukrainian government to do here?
Czy się słyszymy?
Mr. Slav, do you hear us?
O, to chyba pana Rostisława z nami nie ma, w związku z tym
Seems like
przejdę do
Mr.
kwestii, o
Rostislav
której
is not
mówiliśmy,
with us.
o odbudowie i o nowych
I'm gonna go to the next question. We were talking about reconstruction and certain issues when it gets to ensuring new environmental
całej praktycznie Ukrainy
requirements. So
będzie
the
mogła
question to Mr.
pozwolić sobie
Hennady,
na wdrażanie wszystkich tych kosztownych
rebuilding the whole country and making it more modern, whether Ukraine can really afford to take into all the environmental requirements. One people say that it could be through the energy security, and this can be used to create new economy of Ukraine. On the other side, it's a very pricey process, but on the other side, can Ukraine really do that, sticking to all European conditions? Hello, everyone, dear colleagues, and thank you for this question. When it gets to norms and standards in Ukraine, I want to say that in Ukraine, European standards that are enacted in construction industry, not only there, but we already have adapted them as national. And Ukraine has taken on the liability to bring its normative base into compliance with European and is executing this. For the last 2 years in Ukraine as a national, there were more than 40,000 European and international standards brought into Ukraine. When it gets to construction, then it's approximately 3,000 standards that are in act now in Ukraine as national. And when we talk about Ukrainian normative base, regulation base, I think that this is not very clearly formulated when it gets to the actual status of things. European, international base in Ukraine, it is enact as national. And another thing, that there could be certain conflicts between those standards that are set by the national rules and international. Yes, there are some conflicts in those standards. When, for example, the same type of product can be enacted also by the national standard and European standard that has been adopted in the 2010-2015, when there was the first wave of regulation adaptation, but those were the first standards that were adopted within 2000s. And now, in 2022, 2024, the acting European standards were adopted, and it can be, for some products, it can be covered by the requirements of those standards. But what's negative here, it's about the overall state of regulatory framework. When we talk about sustainable construction and using efficient technology, these issues are being handled by Ukraine for many years, and indeed, regulatory and legislative framework is already prepared in order to implement in our country efficient technology. When we talk about the development and sustainable development and energy efficiency, and as for the speed of the usage of those, because for our country, probably now, in the front, we have such notions as the terms of execution and implementation of certain technology. So those things are very relevant for our country, and we're ready to work with them.
Dziękuję bardzo. To muszę powiedzieć, że tu bardzo optymistyczny.
Thank you very much. You know, your speech was very optimistic, and your view is very optimistic. But how does it look? What does it look like on the Polish side, taking into consideration the plans of zero emission? Because in Poland, how Polish companies, they try to adopt themselves to this new gigantic expenses that are caused by the Green Deal that is set by the European Union. And I think that in Ukraine, the expenses are gonna be even higher than in Poland. Yes, your view is indeed reasonable, and I said that Ukraine is ready to implementation and already had a big step into implementation of modern European and international standards. This is true, but not all the issues are handled yet. And the Regulation 305 in Europe has been working for 14 years. And in Ukraine, this regulation hasn't gone in act completely. In 2020, there was a law adopted that were so-called 305 regulation, which implemented the requirements of this regulation 305 within our law, and it had to become an act from 2023. Hence, in 2022, it was postponed until December 2025. But after this 2025, this is a political decision. There will be no postponement, and the actors of the construction market, they will have to start working according to this regulation 305. And I talk a lot with our international foreign colleagues, and I know about the problems that exist
on this 305 regulation in European market. We haven't encountered them yet. So here's the question: as for those requirements that are set by this regulation, also by the green construction, sustainable construction. So for us, for now, yet, it's in its initial stage. That's why the experience that Poland has when it gets to how the country has gone through this first stage of implementation of the requirements of the green construction, green sustainable economy. It's very important for Ukraine because with these things, our players on the market, they haven't encountered yet.
Jasne. To pan dyrektor Wyrwas.
Please, Mr. Director Wyrwas, can you please comment this previous question?
Ja можу говорити, так?
Can I
Pan
speak? Yes.
profesor już skończył. Pozdrawiam pana, panie
Tak.
profesorze.
To na początku pan dyrektor Wyrwas, potem pan dyrektor
Let's first Mr. Konrad Wyrwas speak first, and then Mr. Vladimir, we will give the floor to. A lot of things were mentioned, and I must say that everything that was said, it's of course all the speakers, they had their reasoning, but we should not say that everything that is going to be happening in construction is only positive things. Of course, we will have to be rebuilding, modernizing, and everything. But during the process of Ukraine reconstruction, we need to concentrate on modernization of the country because, for example, to make those chips, for example, and so on, you need to build the plants that were ruined. And Mr. Professor Assanowicz, he said that we need to know where and what amount we need to build. It's a very important process of relocation of business in Ukraine. We know that a lot of companies, they relocated from eastern part of Ukraine to the territories of western part of Ukraine. So it's important what and where has to be built and rebuilt. But another important thing is under what rules this process of reconstruction will be happening. And maybe I wouldn't be worried that much as for the funding, which is, of course, I believe that the money will be found for reconstruction, but I think the problem will be laying within how this money is going to be spent. And I think that this is one of the core questions for Polish entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs from the West. Us, as the biggest organization of representatives of construction business in Poland, we have a lot of questions from Western partners. How do we assess the situation in Ukraine? And we get a lot of proposals, for example, that Western companies with Polish companies, they would be eager to implement, realize some contracts, construction contracts in Ukraine. But so far, the processes that are connected to transparency, to tenders and public procurement, until it's regulated and it fully meets European standards, until that point, there are going to be problems when it gets to entering Ukraine and implementation of projects in Ukraine. Of course, the construction markets, they are already warmed up. And of course, we would be happy to enter Ukraine to work and work together. But this business is going to be happening on the principles, based on the principles. So it's convenient, it's beneficial, it's transparent, it's clear, and it's safe. And all of this has clear and has to be it will be also looked at from the point of view of corruption. We know that Western companies, they're very much afraid of corruption and no one wants to risk the lives of their workers and all of these things and the corruption as well, all the opportunities will be taken into consideration. Just recently, we were taking part in two very powerful conferences related to reconstruction in Ukraine. And this was also taken into consideration until those processes are transparent, clear, safe. Until that point, there is no participation. We have the desire, we have the technology, we have the equipment, and the problem is the transparency of the procedures, a reform of law system from the economic point of view in Ukraine. This is a big problem. Of course, we're talking about powerful investment processes, powerful economic processes as well. This is very important element when we talk about policy and strategy of entering Ukrainian market. Unfortunately, Mr. Lukash mentioned about the construction of this path in Shahini that was 60% was funded by the Bank of State Economy with participation of Polish companies. And we know that that project has been lasting for a good few years and the decision on the level of vice prime ministers of government have already been carried out. As for the implementation of this project, we were talking about a small investment project, this border project and the border crossing, but only when the Minister Veresh and Ms. Vereshchuk intervened, this process started moving. But again, a new tender was announced, and once again, Polish company was the winner. And new documents were prepared that were sent to Ukrainian side, and it's silence. Again, nothing is happening, unfortunately. What else? The Prozoro system. This is by this humorous assessment by Polish companies. This system is called a system of public procurement for Ukrainian companies. And I'm coming back to the transparency issue and all the processes and this process that meets the legislation, and we want this system to be integrated with European system, not for it to, so we can freely move within this clear system of Ukrainian market, but not only how Ukrainian company is going to tell us. What else? Also, the hope on fast recovery and modernization of Ukraine. I would set it to 50 years or more, because in Poland, the infrastructure without war was building for the last 20 years, but Ukraine is much bigger. Hence, if we talk about rebuilding infrastructure and about any energy line or railway, we need to take into consideration that it's going to be longer than 5 years. Of course, we can hope, but I don't really think that within 5 years all of that can really happen, and especially if the money is going to be provided by World Bank or EBRD or other funds of EU or some private funds or other financial institutions. All of this money require or it's foreseen to be used to new regulations that are connected to environmental ones, but all of that takes a lot of time. So we need to look at this realistically, and when we talk about ensuring the basic livelihood conditions, I think the quick solution would be modular building. In Western Europe, it's quite developed, and the companies that work in modular buildings, they are on this start line, so to say, in order to build multi-story modular buildings, even within few months, a year. A lot of them can be built, but all of that is okay. All of that can be launched, but we have to know on what, by what regulatory framework, what regulations we're going to be working on there, what principles. Hence, Ukraine has to answer all of those questions. Another serious problem that I mentioned in the beginning would be the labor market. And this is the labor market, the lack of specialists that are residents of Ukraine. They're in different countries. If there are going to be some conditions for them to come back to Ukraine, they would probably come back, or they're going to be also guided by the Polish or Western companies where they are working right now. But once again, under what conditions are they going to be working? If now there is, if now we're talking about peace in Ukraine, for example, will come, but within the next 2-3 years after the peace comes, the residents 2-3 years they cannot leave the country. Then the means of searching for specialists, prepared specialists, the return of those specialists to Ukraine can be a big question mark. So we have to ask ourselves, Polish companies, they probably will not take part in powerful investment projects as the leading contractors. They can be maybe subcontractors along with the Western partners or Ukrainian partners, but there are a lot of other segments in which Polish construction companies are interested. It's manufacturing certain materials, because we know that in Ukraine there are Polish companies that are functioning. There are certain investments that are being implemented in construction that are connected to manufacturing construction materials and so on. So in this aspect, I think that we will be taking a very active part. There are other two areas in which we can share our experience, and this because we are quite educated in the processes that are regulated by different European regulations. People that work in project bureaus, when we talk about engineer project of architectural sites, and we have a lot of experience in the area of construction oversight, because this is an important element. Ukraine also is going to encounter this problem, because you can have money, but you need to also carry out architectural oversight to make sure that all the processes are happening under certain principles. And in this aspect, Poland has quite a lot of experience and quite a lot of specialists. What else? Yes, and also, Mr. Lukasz, another element that I believe is very important from me. Just recently, there was some new analytic material that appeared in Germany, where it says about the competition that is appearing on Ukrainian market from the sides of countries that are not part of EU. We're also responding to this quite a lot, because it turns out that the money that is spent in Ukraine most of the times is used by, in particular, those Turkish companies or Chinese companies. And I think that at some point we need to start thinking about this. So we're rebuilding the country, but why those money that are being put in Ukraine, those companies are not part of EU. So there are a few important moments that we need to take into consideration. I'm not going to go deeper into this, but I think when we have a chance, we will have to think about this. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Volodymyr. We're giving the floor to you. You wanted to say something, to comment.
Pan dyrektor Wlasiuk, proszę.
Дуже дякую. Тут було піднято
Yes,
багато
thank you
серйозних
very
питань.
much. A lot of
Всіма
serious
виступаючими.
issues were raised by all the speakers.
Трішки прокоментувати
And I would like
ситуацію,
to
щоб ми більш розуміли реальність
I would like to
України.
comment for us to understand the reality of Ukraine. There's a war happening, quite serious war, and everyone understands. And thank you for this support that is there. But we have to understand this together. Ukraine is holding the enemy back. And there was a question when it gets to details, and I think Mr. Stefan was asking this question. Very important. There's no details for now because we don't know the ending of this war, but we talked about how Ukraine can look like. Maybe on the east of Ukraine there will be some military settlements or fortification that require a lot of construction in the east of Ukraine. In central and western part of Ukraine, it's going to be more about industrial activity. In this country, this picture is being built, and we don't have it because we don't have the results of the war. But we know for sure that the use of materials and construction is colossal, and we already named it. And because the war is still ongoing, so if 60 billion for just materials, along with construction works, is going to be more than 100 billion. Another one, I think Mr. Jakub was asking this or raising this question when it gets to zero emission for CO2. So we understand that probably there are no companies in Ukraine that can do that. But as far as we understand in EU, there are still no companies that can stick to those requirements. And there's an important process, as it was rightfully mentioned. This is a very pricey process. And we understand the main rule is build back better. And this is the key rule. So when we were calculating this, we were taking into consideration the building of other buildings, not the ones that were put together, built in Soviet Union. But when it gets to other things, the structural funds, for example, that Poland had some time when they were making their infrastructure more modern, it's important for Ukraine. It's impossible. The deficit of the budget is going to be approximately $35–40 billion because because we spent most of the money for the defense, and during this time to find money for green transition, Green Deal, it's very hard for Ukraine. And I propose we look at it realistically. In Ukraine, there is a production ArcelorMittal in Kryvyi Rih, and they produce metal. And they also have one in Luxembourg, and Mr. Mita is the owner of this company. And we read this interesting information that he got a big grant on modernization of the capacity with the goal to go to green to follow the Green Deal. And of course, Mr. Amita, he spent this grant to modernize the enterprises in Luxembourg, not in Ukraine. So this is another thing, to find the mechanisms or find have access to those structural funds to have this transition. And it's going to be impossible to be done when it gets to requirements to green concrete, green brick, and so on. It's going to require certain transition period, and of course, it's a lot of work that has to be done. And I also want to say that the experience of Polish colleagues is very important. We cannot talk about closing Ukrainian market in no way. We understand we're fully open to European Union. We have a law on localization. This is about Turkish and Chinese manufacturers of equipment, but we are not using it towards the European manufacturers, because we have this agreement, this FTA that we have signed about free trade. So when we talk about the engagement of Ukrainian companies, they have to be engaged to the tenders as much as possible. But on the principles of accountability and transparency, this process will be also supporting the adaptation of Ukrainian companies to those regulations that EU is working with. And it's very important to have this joint forms of enterprise, of activity consortiums, and joint contract activity, and that work has to be done now, because I heard this numbers that the approval of the contract of this project is 5 years. This is not known to us, but we're moving faster, and we are moving to EU, and all of this preparation has to be done now before waiting for the war to be finished. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see that we can be talking about these problems for quite a long time. So let's talk about the prospects of Polish and Ukrainian enterprises in construction sector, and what points there's some opportunities for cooperation where they can work together, and what governments of our countries do in order to accelerate the cooperation in construction between those countries. Mr. Gennady, please, the floor goes to you. Well, what the governments of our countries do, I cannot comment on, but I can comment on how we could ensure cooperation. Mr. Konrad very rightfully mentioned that there are some areas that are very relevant to Ukraine. The key area is reconstruction of ruined buildings. This is the key for our country. And that reconstruction is done in two ways. The first way is to renew the buildings that were built under the old norms and regulations, and old concrete and so on. Why we're following this path? There's social issue. People lost their housing. They have to go somewhere. That's why we have to prepare and we have to build new ones. And our institute has done a lot of projects on reconstruction, renovation of those buildings that were ruined or damaged. But this has no connection to the new principles that exist in the world as for consumption of energy, consumption of resource in general, when it gets to sustainable development. This is a needed measure by which mainly the reconstruction of Ukraine is happening, new construction. a new construction, that the modular construction, it's very important in the Soviet Union and Poland and Eastern Germany. They went through this path where they had to rebuild a lot of housing, a lot of buildings after the consequences of World War II. And here the solution was due to industrial construction. Industrial construction, the modular and big panel. This is one of the areas, and it's important to work together when it gets to how modern technological solutions that is used in different countries, how it's used in Ukraine. And we need to be clear about where to build, what to build, because when we talk about construction in Ukraine, still climate and environmental conditions in Ukraine, they're quite special. And all of this has to be decided and handled, and joint project that can be implemented if this direction in which we can go. And also, Mr. Konrad said about the conditions, and I'm talking here, and I can speak quite long about technical peculiarity about our building industry, but there are also some legal and political ones, and whether these standards and whether they have to be brought as close as possible to those principles that the world is using in order to have joint activity, hopefully for decades, and we can rebuild our country. Thank you, Mr. Hennady, and I see that Mr. Konrad wanted to comment. Thank you. I just 2 words to comment. So when it gets to intergovernmental cooperation, I must say that the ruling elite at this point is not taking proper decisions, unfortunately. And we know this from those decisions that are shown in social media and governmental portals. In Monday, it was supposed to take part the meeting of the intergovernmental committee as for the issues of the economical development, but it doesn't mean that those meetings on the work level, they have to be not happening. And we were a little bit surprised that this meeting was cancelled. And I believe that bilateral relationship between our countries, they have more to say crisis character rather than celebrational character, where we can be celebrating our relationship. But hence, we have to say one more thing, that this is the question of equal interpretation of all the participants of the process. In Poland, when there was a conflict exploded, there was 60,000 Ukrainian companies were created, and out of those, there are also companies that function in constructional industry, and they also are happy to have their business because there are clear set rules for their work. Another important thing, of course, the question of money goes to the front. And you mentioned the company that works in Luxembourg, not in Ukraine, but I think it's a question to the owner why it was spent in Luxembourg, not in Ukraine. Maybe one of the main reasons that in Luxembourg this money is going to be spent according to the existing rules, and in Ukraine it's going to be also followed with the existence of certain risk. And when it go back to finances, there are money, and the money to rebuild Ukraine, of course, they're going to be there for sure. But the conditions are absolute transparency and transition to this transparency, fighting corruption and improving the situation. If those conditions are met, if everyone is functioning on equal conditions, all of that will be working. If that is not there, then it's going to be lasting for long, long. And as a closing word, Mr. Rostislav, and Mr. Rostislav is Vice President
Jest z
of
nami?
the Chamber of Commerce. Are you with us? Mr. Rostislav, are you with
Nie ma
us?
pana Rostisława, to w takim
Or
razie
you don't hear us?
dziękuję państwu bardzo za
Okay, well, unfortunately, Mr. Rostislav is not here. I would like to say thank you to all of the participants for this meeting, and I can see that our discussion could be going on and on, but unfortunately, we're limited by time. Once again, I'm very grateful for the meeting. The next meeting is going to be connected to woodworking industry. It's going to be happening by the end of October, as far as I know, and I want to say thank you to Open Society Fund Foundation with the help for the meeting. Thank you very much for your participation.